This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to...
This is Nos Arietes.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A sideline fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is good.
Seattle Sounders, the greatest MLS team in history.
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Paul McKay says, cheat!
We want to win. Let's see how the Sunday, bro.
Good for Seattle!
Welcome to another episode of Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and Watson's Counter. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today to help preview the upcoming Timbers-Sounders rivalry game is Sam Spieler of Stumptown Footy, which is been reborn on Substack. You can read their stuff at stumptownfooty.substack.com. Eventually, I guess that will probably be stumptownfooty.com, but for now, it's a Substack subdomain. Anyway, thank you, Sam, for joining us to talk about Sounders Timbers.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, like all good sports blogs, it all boils down to eventually being a newsletter sent directly into your inbox. So that's kind of, we fulfilled our destiny there.
It is funny the way that the media landscape has really come full circle, where I remember a few years ago, not to get too off topic here, I remember a few years ago someone talking about like how many of our readers are coming to us from email, and I thought, zero. What is is this a question? Why is anyone coming us to from email? And then I find out that email's back, baby.
Yeah, it's the new email is the new Twitter, which was the new email from for getting everybody to read your stuff now. So yeah, now we're, instead of spamming your Twitter feeds, we're spamming your email inboxes, just like any good job does.
Yeah. So real quick, like before we get into this game, how has it been so far? What has the transition been like for you guys?
It's been good. I think we've appreciated kind of having all of the, like, Substack is a very like solid kind of editor and kind of base for like putting together posts, which has really helped us. The support from like the Portland soccer community has been awesome so far. Like when we initially kind of announced that, Vox was, not supporting the site momentarily, we were part of those cuts. The outpouring of support was great. And we've seen that reflected in kind of like the people signing up for the site, the people sharing it, the people logging on. So it's obviously not quite the same thing. But it's definitely been like, it feels like it's kind of, it's the spirit is living on. It feels like we've definitely been able to maintain that same space where folks can come and talk about the soccer teams, which from the Portland Thorns perspective is, oh my God, they're so good. And from the Timbers perspective is, oh my God, we're so bad. So, it is pretty much the same as the old site was.
Well, that's a good jumping off point. You mentioned the Timbers being bad. Let's get into that a little bit as to just how bad the Timbers have been. I feel like there was a joke in there that I missed, but
it's the hyperbole of on social media and comments is that like there's only two modes that I really see kind of like on social media when it comes to talking about the Timbers. It's either greatest team ever, we're going to win every trophy, or wooden spoon, not going to touch any, close to silverware. The second coming of the original FC Cincinnati when they joined. So it's really kind of what you're seeing. And, I can respect that when the product on the field is rough, which it has been for a few weeks now. I totally get that frustration, like with the Timbers, because they've had slow starts in the past. And this one feels up there with kind of some of the more frustrating ones so far.
Yeah, so we're 7 games into the season, and it's been 6 straight winless for the Timbers. And
Right.
I've seen a few stats out there that were pretty eye-opening. One of them, I think it's 55 shots through 7 games, which is like by double digits, the fewest shots they've ever had in any 7 game stretch, let alone the first 7 games of a season. Has the off and I watched the Galaxy game, which actually was a pretty good result, all things considered, 0-0. But it was shocking at how little of the ball the Timbers had and how little danger they posed in a home game against what was also a pretty bad Galaxy team.
Yeah, it's that second part that I think has been the main challenge for the Timbers, is creating danger and creating like consistent threat on goal. We're all used to Portland not having a ton of the ball. That is one of arguably their most effective kind of states, is absorbing, counterattacking, playing direct play forward, threatening on goal. The challenge is that they're not translating those transition moments into threats, like into a consistent attacking threat on goal. Like you said, yeah, the historically low shot output is kind of reflective of the fact that they can do the work to get the ball into the final third. And at that point, it just doesn't seem like there is a consistent plan. And yes, some of that might have to be because of the rash of injuries that they've been experiencing, which, yeah, we can get into. But overall, they're working the ball into somewhat dangerous positions. They're just not getting shots off, or they're not having it be quick enough so that they can create a clear scoring opportunity.
So the injuries are an undeniable part of the narrative this year. And the latest was Eric Williamson being declared out for the year after going through the similar process as Jordan Morris, where he busts an ACL a couple years ago. He comes back. Looks like he's as good as new. And then the other ACL goes.
Yeah, it's just super unfortunate, both for the player and for the team. Like, it was just the latest injury to kind of go onto the list, but it definitely was the one that kind of hit the hardest, just because of the fact that everyone was hoping that Williamson was going to get back to that 2020, 2021 form that we saw, because, his 2022 was kind of hampered by that injury. Him being limited last year kind of limited Portland's chances in the chance. I mean, obviously they missed the playoffs, so that was a big miss. And him missing this year is a big miss as well. There was, earlier, before the season started, preseason, there was the hope that the midfield trio of him, Diego Chara, and Evander, new designated player midfield signing, was going to be kind of like the thing that was going to jumpstart Portland's offense, because offense was the thing they missed last year. And so then they brought in Evander, revamped the midfield. That was going to be the thing that they were going to hope to lean on in order to be successful and start scoring more goals. And then, one of the key players in that trio goes down for the year. So it's just the next thing that the Timbers have to deal with as far as like injuries related to. There is no like for like replacement for Williamson on the roster. So Savarese will have to kind of rethink how he wants his team to attack moving forward with the personnel that he has. There's players that can play that box-to-box role, but nobody can really do what Williamson does. So it's a loss for sure.
So one of the other players in that trio that you mentioned is Evander. He was a $10 million signing. He came into the league with quite a bit of hype. A lot of, there was a few people saying he was the biggest offseason signing in the entire league. He started off a little slow, and then he got hurt, and it looks like he's back now. Is that right?
He should be fully healthy, ready to go. He played the first 2 games of the season, suffered an injury, which, grew into like some other injury, which that is a theme for a lot of Timbers attackers this year. He made his return last weekend in the second half against Vancouver, played most of the second half. So odds are that he will be good to go, ready to start on Saturday. And the hope is that he's able to kind of settle in a little bit more, because he started off okay. The first 2 Timbers games were a little rough, with, a 1-0 win against Sporting Kansas City. And then they went and got shelled at LAFC, which wound up being slightly more respectable, 3-2. He got his first MLS goal in that loss, just kind of, sparked kind of like a mini comeback towards the end. But overall, he hadn't quite, lived up to that $10 million price tag, like you said. which is club record transfer fee for the Timbers. And they were betting a lot on him. Like when you talk about what Portland needs to do to kind of revamp their offense, kind of boils down to Evander starting to come good, starting to show those numbers that they acquired him for. He was, a force in the Danish league and also in the Europa League. And, Portland has been hoping that he's going to start to show those numbers in MLS. And as has been the case, I think, with many a foreign sign in MLS, his transition period has been a little rocky, a little rough. The injury probably didn't help things. If he can start to settle and start to, show that quality and connect with and build chemistry with his teammates, that could be a big thing that could help lift Portland's offensive production, whether it be Saturday or a little farther down the line.
So one of the other themes with these injuries and with the offensive production has been sort of how those two things have sort of like come together. And also hurt this year, Felipe Mora, Sebastian Blanco, Yimi Chara, all three have been declared out for this game. I don't know that they have they even played much this year? What's the situation in that band of attacking three?
Yeah, so Felipe Mora played 2 or 3 games last season. Felipe Mora was originally coming back from an off-season knee injury, played 2 or 3 games last season, and then had to get shut down because the knee still wasn't right. So he had additional surgery to kind of clean up what was looking on there. So he has been out since the start of the season. They're eyeballing a return in the summer. For him, they're definitely taking it slow, especially considering his history. Yimi Chara played, I think, like the first 30 or 40 minutes of the first game and then suffered a hamstring injury and then went down. So he hasn't played yet. He's still out. He's getting closer. I think they're looking at probably within the next couple of weeks him making their return. And then Sebastian Blanco has been, one of the more unfortunate stories, I think, of Timbers 2023 so far. He was Sebastian Blanco. We all know what the force that he shows. Sounders fans know what he can do when he's all too well. And he was still suffering from a lingering kind of knee injury last season. It was revealed that his knee was still giving him pain and still giving him problems. And it got to the point where, he needed to kind of slow it down. There were times earlier this season where he couldn't even train because it was just giving him so much pain. He's starting to get a little bit more healthy. He's starting to train a little bit more in full. There were reports out of Timbers training this week that he was in full training. There's a smile on his face. I suspect it's just because that he knew Portland was playing Seattle, and that always puts him in a good mood. But he won't be playing as well. He's still out. There's no real timetable for him to return. But I think we might see him eventually this season. We might not. If we don't, it presents another challenge for the Timber staff to kind of handle for how do you handle his status on the roster? How do you handle his contract? If it looks like he's not going to be able to play, if he is able to play, will he reach that peak form? He's getting up there in years. Will he be able to get back to that? So it's been a real challenge offensively because, in those players that we listed, that's 2 of Portland's designated players. 2 out of their 3 have been out and haven't played a lot. And in MLS, especially if your designated players are like offensively minded, or attackers, if they don't play, you generally don't score a lot of goals. You generally don't win a lot of games. And Portland is now kind of like the next living example of that. So It's created an interesting balance for the Timbers to kind of look at because on one hand, yes, you have all of those top end players like injured. You have like the next 2 or 3 players down the depth chart injured. Portland has had to play wingers in central midfield and put fullbacks as wingers. They've had so many injuries up and down the roster. So that makes it really challenging to put together a team, especially again in a league like MLS where not a lot of the money is invested farther down the roster. And at the same time, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so who do you expect to be starting in those spots?
Yeah, well, the good news is that more players are becoming healthier. More players are kind of coming back. It looks like Christian Paredes, central midfielder, probably the likeliest to step into that long-term role for after Eric Wimson goes down. He's going to be ready. He might not start. It'll probably be David Ashala, U22 player, 20-year-old central midfielder. He's coming back from his own injury. He'll probably start in the midfield with Diego Chara and Evander. Up top, forward-wise, it sounds like their new signing, Franck Boli, is ready to go. He's been working through fitness the past couple of days. He's already scored a goal in his debut, helped get Portland their first road point at a draw at Dallas. He looks like he'll be ready to start. Darren Espria is getting healthier. It looks like he'll be ready to start as well, which will allow him starting in the center midfield, getting set will allow Santiago Moreno to move back to the wingers. So, those are all starting caliber players, if you talk about that front three. So it's getting better. The challenge is that if that's the front three that starts, it'll be the first time that front three is played together. It'll be the first time that midfield three has played together. So the front six or so of the Timbers is healthier. They are, that upper end of the roster, and they still haven't had a chance to mesh, to gel offensively. So it might not fix all of the problems, but it's moving Portland in the right direction offensively.
Yeah, and somewhat counterintuitively, possibly, it seems like for all the struggles that the Timbers have gone through, it's undeniable that their form against the Sounders specifically is probably the best it's ever been in the history of the rivalry. 3 straight wins. I haven't looked up the last time that the Timbers have beat the Sounders 3 straight times, but I wouldn't be shocked if this is. I'm sure it's the first time in the MLS era. It might be
definitely
first time and even longer than that. And so I have to imagine that aspect of it, even though the last time they played was, many months ago in the previous season, that must give some sense of, if not confidence, at least inspiration.
It does. You could see it in some of, the press conferences and the comments that were said beforehand. You can tell that there is an increased energy around the Timbers camp. It's been a tough start to the season, not going to lie, but this has always been a game they've had circled on the calendar. And I think both the rivalry, the energy into that, the history that obviously plays into things, as well as the fact that, like you said, it's been a while since Portland lost to Seattle, since, that one, the home game in 2021. That was the last time that the Timbers...
The 6-2 game, ironically, is the last time.
I know. It's, that poked the bear a little bit too much, and Portland got pissed off and then started playing after that. It seems like we have this conversation pretty much every time Portland's going to play, where form-wise, the teams are in a completely different place. Seattle's flying high. They're leading the West. They're one of the best teams in the league this year. They're probably going to challenge for at least a piece of silverware before all is said and done. Portland is, I think, third from bottom in the Western Conference. Like you said, historically, offensively bad. And you have to throw all of that out when it comes to these two teams playing, because the energy from Portland will almost assuredly be higher than it has been in any game this season. And I'm sure that will be doubly so for the Sounders as well, because I bet it doesn't feel good to lose to, your biggest rival 3 games in a row, haven't experienced a win in a bit. I think it kind of heightens the stakes, which feels counterintuitive for this game, because on paper, looks like it should just be a runaway Sounders win. And because of just the nature of this rivalry, the weird topsy-turvy nature of it, it doesn't matter what the forms of the teams are going into it. I think both teams are coming in believing that they're going to win, which I think is huge for a Timbers team that has kind of been struggling to kind of find that belief, find that kind of grit, find that kind of fight for most of the year.
Yeah, I can't help but feel a lot of similarities to sort of the game where I think it feels like there was a real change in, the Timbers won the meeting after the 2021 game, which I guess ended up being sort of like I guess that may have been sort of vaguely where their season turned around in 2021. But the meeting where the first meeting last year, to me, in my mind, is the one that stands out, because the Sounders were actually in really good form. They were getting ready to unveil their they were planning to unveil the Champions League banner. And it was supposed to be sort of like this achievement day for the Sounders, and the Timbers, who weren't playing that well, as if memory serves, just kind of came in and punched the Sounders in the face, won that game 3-0. And it didn't end up turning around the Timbers season, but it definitely heralded the end of the Sounders season.
Yeah.
And the Sounders sort of went into a tailspin from that point forward and didn't really ever come out of it. So yeah, it's not without precedence that these two teams will be sort of going in divergent directions, and this game sort of changes that entirely. It's I would think that any Sounders fan that goes into this game feeling anything but like really nervous is fooling themselves. That's not how these things go.
No, that's how I felt, I think, before literally every single Portland-Seattle game, including the one, the most recent meeting in August at Providence Park when Portland clinched the Cascadia Cup. Even then, it was like, Seattle was not playing well. Portland was in, I think, better form. And, the stakes of, if you win this, you got this Cascadia Cup. It's huge. Like, even with all that behind, like, I was still just a bundle of nerves going into that as well, just because that's just what this rivalry does. You can never rule out the most ridiculous of possibilities. We've seen a lot of that kind of happen. I think there's such good watermark kind of games to look at for things. Cause like you said, that game, I think Portland many Timbers fans would call either of those Seattle games, either of those wins Portland got over Seattle last year, the high mark of last year's season. Missing the playoffs sucked, but they're like, many Timbers fans are like, missing the playoffs sucked, but hey, we won the Cascadia Cup and we got to spoil that party up in Seattle in June. I think that's just kind of the hold that this rivalry has. Yes. And Timbers for so long, they hadn't won the Cascadia Cup for, some time, since I think 5-6 years. And so now the framing kind of shifts to, okay, can they defend it? Can they actually prove that they can win it consistently? Which is something they've never done in the MLS era. They win it and the next season they, face plant or, lose it. So, it puts more pressure on this game as well, along with all of the other things of what Portland's 2023 has been so far.
So on that note, how much, there must be some pressure internally. There can be talk about injuries and there can be talk of all this other stuff, but the reality is that just like the Sounders, the Timbers didn't make the playoffs last year. There has to be some sense of heat building up within, like, okay, so it's 7 games into the season. The season's not over. There's a lot. MLS is a very forgiving league, but there does become a point where, there's going to be some pressure to make real changes.
100%. I think whether there's nothing being talked about, it's definitely in the back of some folks' minds of decision makers. Timbers' new general manager, Ned Grabavoy, Gavin Wilkinson is out after long time in the Timbers front office as part of kind of the fallout from the Yates report. Back in the fall. So Ned Grabavoy is, the new general manager, still kind of feeling out his way, still kind of trying to build up his team and starting to kind of get a handle for, what does he want this team to be? It's his opportunity to. He backs Giovanni Savarese. He backs the coaching staff. He's been very open and honest about all of that. And if results don't go your way, like that affects any sort of coach's backing if the team isn't playing well. Like you said, it's hard to define what success would really look like for the Timbers. Obviously, making the playoffs is priority number one. Is that enough for a league where, over half of the conference is going to be making the playoffs this year? Is that enough for, a team that was in the MLS Cup final, just 2 years ago and was challenging for trophies consistently for the better part of, 3-4 years. That is the question that I think Grabavoy is going to be thinking about. That's the question that I think, the decision makers, the powers that be, I think are going to be kind of on their mind. It's too early to tell. Obviously, losing to Seattle sucks, and that will obviously cause a lot of the pressure from the fans to kind of ramp up, as it did, after 6-2 2 years ago. That was definitely some of the strongest calls yet at the time. Making MLS Cup kind of, squashed some of those and kind of bought roughly a year or so, maybe a little bit more of goodwill. If the stretch continues, if this loss against Seattle is kind of just another kind of tick down and kind of like this downward spiral for the spring, it'll be tough. I think it will put a lot of pressure on the latter half of the games when everyone is healthy. You can hide behind kind of the excuse of, there's a lot of injuries. There's a lot of, challenge. Like a lot of the players that were expecting to be key contributors aren't. They aren't playing. They aren't able to make an impact yet. You can lean on that for some while. Okay, once everybody is healthy, once everyone is kind of back into the field, once you have the team that you're going to have, can you start to pull together those results? Every loss kind of becomes amplified, kind of becomes with a little more pressure. So, we'll see where Portland kind of ends up at the end of the season. It'll be an interesting question if the Timbers don't kind of like figure it out. What does happen next? If Portland misses the playoffs again, that seat will probably be getting pretty warm.
Yeah, I would imagine it would. And just sort of like one other big picture question, the thing that seems to still be hanging over this organization is sort of all the things that led to Gavin Wilkinson being dismissed. What is the vibe? Like, is that something that the organization feels like they've moved on from? Do they feel like they've made the changes necessary, or is this something that fans are still really stressing about?
I think the organization feels like they've moved on. The question is whether a lot of our people are as well. A lot of the fans that are in the seats. I think so. To brief recap, obviously Merritt Paulson is in the process of selling the Portland Thorns. They're going to have new ownership, so it'll be the first kind of splitting of the club, which folks were pretty two different ownership groups. Thorns will still play in Providence Park, but it just like the soul of it kind of feels split, which sucks for a lot of fans. He's still maintaining his ownership stake in the Timbers. He's not CEO anymore. He's kind of stepped down, and Heather Davis has kind of stepped in as the new kind of Timbers CEO and like running operations there. And the club has been doing a lot of, having a lot of visibility, a lot of media with her to kind of talk about, yes, mistakes were made. We're pushing changes. We're trying to make the Timbers organization a place where people want to work. They're trying to kind of push that narrative. A lot of fans are finding it hard to hear that narrative and believe it if Merritt Paulson is still there. If he's still kind of like looming up in the upper catacombs of Providence Park, like the Phantom of the Opera. Like it's hard to kind of overlook kind of like that specter of him kind of being there. I think the reality is, the pressure was about as intense as you think it's going to get for Merritt Paulson to kind of leave the team entirely and sell it, and he's still there. So barring MLS and Don Garber doing anything, which the odds of that are probably pretty low, because of the standards of selling a team and because of the comments that Garber made, in the wake of all of that, Merritt Paulson's still going to be there. And it's just kind of something that many sports fans have to deal with owner is crappy, right? Like, most sports fans have to deal with that in some way, shape, or form. I think with everything that the past two years at this point have been with all of the revelations around the club and everything, I think, Timbers fans want to have a club that they feel that, that they believe in, that they feel like they see themselves in, and they can feel that like is reflective of kind of like, the good that is in Portland and is in the Portland soccer community. And right now, a lot of people still just aren't feeling that. We'll see how long that continues for. Maybe some folks eventually just kind of, compartmentalize it, kind of move on and kind of look at the play on the field. We'll see if it ever reaches kind of like, an inflection point with Merritt Paulson doing something else. It's hard to say what'll happen in the future, but right now I think it's not the same levels of kind of bigger public protests, people like boycotting games, a lot of that stuff that it was, last season or the season before, but it's still there. It's still in the back of everyone's mind.
And would you say that the atmosphere at Providence Park has recovered?
Somewhat. I think, if the Timbers were playing better, I think I would be able to say definitively yes.
Sure.
And if, if their home opener wasn't delayed due to a snowstorm and playing on a Monday night, probably be able to say yes as well. I think for at least at the start of that, you mentioned that Galaxy game, that was closer. That was some of the closest that I felt for it to kind of being like, okay, this is kind of starting to feel like Providence Park again. I would imagine on Saturday, it's going to feel the most like it as well. Like, I think fans they want to support the team. Like, they want to be there and cheer for the team, and they want to be there to, kind of focus on, we're rooting for, our guys, we're rooting for the team on the field. So I would expect that the atmosphere is going to feel pretty close to that on Saturday. Other things kind of being aside of himself. Now, the reason how you get people to stay doing that is by starting to put a better product in the field, starting to play better, starting to, win games. I think I've heard from some fans or, some anecdotes that are just, it's like, I want to support the team, but they're just kind of boring right now. Like, they're not really just doing much. So you got to get things exciting, pulling out a result on Saturday would do a lot for kind of doing that. I think as it has, in recent years, that helps the vibes a lot. A win against Seattle can kind of paper over a lot of the wounds, a lot of the things that are kind of going on.
Yeah, so we don't usually do predictions on the show. I don't do the give me a scoreline thing. That said, do you have like what's your feeling about going into this game? Do you feel good about this? Does this feel like a disaster waiting to happen, or does it feel like maybe like you said, an inflection point where the season potentially starts to turn around?
I am, I mean, as nervous as I usually am for all of these games. And I think I'm still, most of me is kind of like mentally bracing myself for like, oh, this ain't going to be pretty. This isn't going to be good. It's not going to be fun. It's just like losing to Seattle is one thing, but losing to Seattle at Providence Park, I think just kind of hits a little bit harder if you're a Timbers fan, because it's our field, and Seattle obviously brings like a huge traveling section there as well. So hearing that like loud cheering of somebody else on the field is just kind of hits harder than I think everything else. And I mean, we
know that feeling well, all too well. I'm not sure how many Sounders fans even remember the last time they beat the Timbers at home.
No, like why would you? That's
no. I'm saying at Lumen, like we legitimately don't remember the last time we beat the Timbers at Lumen, because it's been, I think it's been 4 years, 5 years. It's crazy. Anyway,
it's wild. So I mean, I think my attitude towards all of this is it's kind of like, all right, this has been going on for too long. Like, this can't be this good, right? Like, Portland has to lose at some point. They're gonna lose at some point up in Seattle, right? Like, I'm just kind of, I believe that the universe, like Timbers fandom, inevitably bends towards disappointment. So like, it's going to happen. It's
the arc of history bends towards disappointment.
There you go. That's the arc of Timbers fandom. Losing to MLS Cup finals kind of will do that to you. So I think it creates kind of this environment and this attitude where I think everybody's kind of bracing for the worst on Saturday. And like in my mind, it's like, ulti go loss. I wouldn't be surprised if Portland doesn't score. That's kind of it. And yet there's a little voice in the back of my mind where it's kind of like, this is exactly what they want you to think.
Exactly.
Exactly what they think. And then they're going to pull out some sort of like extremely ugly, maybe kind of lucky, 1-0 or 2-1, something like that, just because that's just what the Timbers under Savarese do. They're a very emotional team. They play off of the emotions of their coach, the emotions of the occasion. When the energy is high and the emotions are high, they play better. And that this game has all of the makings of that. So if, it kind of progresses and Portland is still in it, they're either maybe one goal down or it's still scoreless. And then, I think the greater the game goes along and they have a shot, that belief's going to grow. And so, there is a reality, despite the bend of the universe, bending towards disappointment, there is reality in which we look back on this game as a point in another inflection point in Portland's season of them kind of turning things around. But again, 96.5% of my brain is telling me to stop that. It's not going to happen.
Well, I'll tell you, as a definite Sounders supporter in this thing, I can't help but go into this both confident that we should win and very, very, very worried that some kind of disaster is just waiting for us around the corner, because it just seems like lately the Timbers Sounders rivalry does not go how you think it's going to go, one way or the other.
Never.
It just seems like the most ridiculously unpredictable fixture on the list, and it's always fun though talking to you, Sam. I'm actually really thrilled to find out that Stumptown Footy is surviving and potentially even thriving in its new home. I would encourage everyone that listens to this podcast to at least check you guys out and to even consider subscribing, because it's always fun to I know Sounders fans care deeply about the rise and fall, but always rooting for the fall of the Timbers, and that's a great way to do it, is to follow it through you guys.
Oh yeah, just see it in real time. It's like reading about reading about the fall of Rome from inside Rome. So exactly. Why not come on down? Yeah, and you best know that if Saturday goes Seattle's way, then the takes will be spicy. You can expect that.
Well, thanks again, Sam. Again, that's stumptownfooty.substack.com. You can also follow them on Twitter. They're still at Stumptown Footy. You can follow Sam. Sam, what's your Twitter handle again?
It's at Samich923, SAMMICH 923.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Signing off for Nos Arietes, I'm Jeremiah O'Shan. Again, thanks to our sponsors, Watson's Counter and Full Pull Wines, and we will catch you next time.